Hi, Dad.
Hello.
Welcome to day one of our oral history project. For the record, today is July 2nd, 2016, and we're in our favorite place, Livingston Manor, New York. And everyone in the family is really excited about this project because we want to find out who you are and what your childhood was like, what your family was like, because today you're 93 and you're a terrific grandfather and father and partner, so let's get started. Question one, where and when were you born?
I was born June 10th, 1923, in a section of Brooklyn called Brownsville, and specifically it was on what's called Howard Street. And when I was 4 years old, we moved to another section of Brooklyn called Crown Heights. And we lived there until I was 17, and then we moved to a third section, also in Brooklyn, called Flatbush. Now, you may have other questions you want to ask me, so let's go back to wherever. Yeah.
Okay.
Have you been back to any of those locations in recent years?
In recent years, I have not been back to any of those locations. But I did go back to to Crown Heights, when Laurie and Jeff were in their teens, and my mother was living in Brooklyn.
You mean Michael?
What did I say?
Jeff, but that's okay.
Oh, Laurie and Michael, right? And my mother was living at that time with my stepfather, Lawrence, and they were also in Brooklyn. So on our way, and we were living in Queens, and on the way to see my mother and Lawrence, I said to the kids, would you like to see where I had lived? And they said, sure. And so we drove through the section in Crown Heights, and it had changed dramatically. It had gone from a lower middle class white area to a 100% black area. And that was it.
Okay, so let's get back into some of your family history. Your parents. Let's first start by talking about your mom and dad. Your mother's name was Susan Solomon. Your dad was Morris Wolkoff. What do you know about them? Where were they born? When did they come to the United States? What was your father's occupation? Go ahead.
Well, my father, and I don't know too much as to where he was born, other than it was somewhere in Russia. And, I'm sorry to this day that when I was younger, I didn't ask more of my father. But when you're young, you tend not to ask these questions. And they really didn't speak too much of their background. So he came from Russia, maybe around in the age of 20, something like that. My mother was born in Poland, and at the time was called Russia, Poland, because Poland, prior to World War II, actually prior to World War I, had been subdivided into various sections which were administered by different countries. And so she was in that part of Poland, which was close to Warsaw, and that was administered by Russia.
And what year do you think they came here?
Well, my mother was 6. I was born when she was 30, so I think she was born in 1893, which means she came somewhere around the turn of the century. Mm-hmm. And my father, who was 10 years older than my mother, came when he was about 20, so he probably came a few years later.
And how did they meet? Do you know?
I don't have any idea.
Okay. So, do you know anything about their families, your grandparents, or did they experience anti-Semitism in Europe? What language did your dad speak? What do you know about him?
Well, the only grandparent I knew was my mother's father, who lived with me, or with us I should say, for a number of years. And I used to call him Zadie, which of course is Yiddish for grandfather. The only other relative that I knew of from either my mother or my father's side, was a sister of my father who lived in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and she had children. She was married. She had children, and on occasion we would go out to Pittsburgh and visit. Not very frequently, but every once in a while. And that was it. And as best I know, my father had siblings who were still in Russia. Supposedly, and I say supposedly because I was never told this, I think it came from my sister Rosalind. My father had a sister who lived in Germany. I think she was married to a German Jew. And my father, again supposedly, went to Germany to go to college because, as you might know, it was very difficult for Jewish boys or girls for that matter, but primarily boys, to attend a school of higher education in Russia. So if the story is correct, he went to Germany to be with his sister and went to Heidelberg University, but I don't think he graduated. And at some point then, he came across the United States.
Do you know why they came to the United States? Either of your parents?
I don't know why my mother's family came to the United States. Well, they came to the United States during the period when there was a mass exodus of Jews and Italians and others from Eastern Europe and Southern Europe. There was a lot of anti-discrimination or anti-Jewish discrimination in Russia at the time for many years. And so a lot of the Russian Jews and the Ukrainian Jews who lived in Ukraine and Lithuania and so forth, they came to the United States and during that period. And my father, and again this is supposition, he may have come because of the war that was taking place between Russia and Japan. And they were...
What year?
I think that war took place somewhere around 1907. I'm not quite sure. Jeff, yes. Question?
1904.
1904. Okay, so I was off 3 years, and so maybe instead of my being 93, I'm only 90.
And what language did they speak when they came here? Do you know?
Well, my mother came at 6,
Mm-hmm.
so she immediately went into elementary school, and she had absolutely no accent.
But her first language was?
First language was English, yes. Essentially, it was almost as if she had been born in the United States in terms of culture and language. My father, as I said, came over, and I'm not quite sure, somewhere around 20, and did have an accent. But he spoke good English, as far as I can remember.
But their first language was Yiddish, or
They
Polish?
did speak Yiddish. No, my mother spoke Yiddish probably because her father spoke Yiddish, and she always, and I don't remember, but she must have spoken Yiddish to him. But I do remember my mother and father occasionally speaking Yiddish to one another.
Okay, and what was your father's career? How did he support the family? And then I understand he became sick, if you could talk
Yeah.
a little bit about
Right,
that.
right. My father, I know, became an insurance agent, sold life insurance. He worked for an agency which sold with Travelers Life Insurance Company. And in 1930, which was just after the Depression had started, he did very, very well. And as a result, because he sold enough insurance, he and my mother were sent to Florida to the Breakers Hotel, which is in Palm Beach, as were many of the others who were salespeople who had attained that sales level. And he took me, because I was only 7 at the time, and my brother, who was 10 years old, he was 17, and my sister Arthur was 6.5 years older, so she was around 13, 14, they stayed home. And what I do remember, and I don't know if my memory is correct or not, but once again, because of anti-Semitic discrimination, those who stayed at the Breakers Hotel had to live on certain floors, separate from the general population. I may be wrong on this, but that's what I seem to remember. But from that point on, from 1930 on, as far as income was concerned, my father's income and the family income went downhill.
Because of the Depression.
Well, the Depression was very heavy at the time, yeah. And my father began to take sick.
And do you
And
know
he-
what was wrong with him?
Well, I know two things. Number one, he was ill for a period of around 8 years. And I don't know whether it progressed as time went on. I assume it did. What the cause was, I don't know. But I remember there was a period where, and he died when I was 16, so probably when I was somewhere around 14 and 15, I remember going with him on one of his calls. He was still trying to sell insurance, and it was very difficult for him to walk, and I sort of had to support him.
How did you survive then? Who supported
to
your
finish the
family?
story, he died when I was 16 at the Unity Hospital, which was directly across from where we lived. And I remember standing at the top of the stairs. We lived on the second floor. When my brother and mother came back from the hospital and said my father had died. And from what I was told, that he supposedly had I say supposedly because I'm not sure, an ulcer of some sort. Maybe the ulcer became so severe that they couldn't do anything with it, and as a result he died. Today I'm sure if the same condition existed, he would still be alive, because of the antibiotics.
So do you remember as a child being poor, or did you feel like money was an issue, or how?
Well, money was an issue. So obviously my father couldn't work.
And your mother was a homemaker?
My mother was at home. My brother Sidney, who I said was 10 years older than I, so when my father died he was 26. So he, prior to my father dying, he had been in college at St. John's University, and he had to stop. He had to quit school and go to work, because otherwise there would have been no income. And I think I didn't know it at the time, and I didn't know for many, many years, but just before my brother Sidney died, he indicated that he had resentment that he had been put in that position where he had to support the family. But that was life.
How would you describe your childhood?
Childhood was a happy childhood.
So despite financial hardship you felt, what made it happy?
Well, to begin with, the brunt of having to make a living or supporting the family didn't fall on me. I went to school and played ball and hung out with my friends. I started working when I was 14 years of age, and I wanted to work because I knew that the family was in bad straits financially, and I wanted to contribute as much as I could towards the living. So how did I start working at 14? Well, I had a friend who had a job delivering bagels and bottles of milk and rolls and things of that nature for a local grocery store. And when the summer came, he asked me if I would take over for the summer because he was going away. I assumed he was going to camp. And when he came back, the owner of the grocery store, asked me if I would continue. So I said sure, because it was an opportunity for me, once again, as I said, to make some money and help contribute. So before I went to school, I would go pick up the milk, pick up the bagels, pick up the rolls, deliver them, and these were buildings which had multi-stories, probably 6 stories tall, no elevators, and so I used to go up each floor carrying this heavy load of food, including the heavy bottles of milk. And of course, when you're that age, it's not a problem. And that continued, I guess, until I went to high school. No, wait a minute, no. I went to I started high school at 14, so I must have done that for perhaps a year or so while I was in high school. And while I was in high school, I did something there too, which gave me a couple of bucks. I think, if I remember correctly, something at the pool, where I did whatever, I don't remember what. And so I tried to do whatever I could to make some money. Now, you might want me to talk about the high school and how I got there, but you may have some questions which predate that. So
Sure. Just
Laurie?
a few.
Yeah.
What were your living arrangements like? What did the apartment look like? Did you have to share a room?
Okay.
That's what.
As I said, we were on the second floor above stores. I think there was an upholstery store below, something like that. And I remember sleeping with my brother, and we occupied one of the bedrooms, so we slept in the same bed. And my grandfather lived with us. That was my mother's father. And I think there was a room off to the side with a separate entrance, and we had a boarder. There was someone who was a single man, and he would pay us X number of dollars per week or per month, whatever. And for how long he was there, I don't remember. I do remember there being trolley cars that ran along the street outside the house, outside the house in the apartment. And you would hear those trolley cars go. You know, they made a lot of noise, but you know, you get used to it, and so it was not a problem sleeping while the trolley cars were going.
And how did your mother wash the clothes, or what do you remember her cooking, or what was her life like?
We did in those days. You didn't have a wash machine. You didn't have a dryer. You washed clothes by hand, and you hung them up on a line, either interior or exterior. She did all the cooking. When I remember when you bring up food, I went to a elementary and junior high school all in one, which was about 2 blocks away, I guess, 3 blocks away. And during lunchtime, we had enough time for me to walk back to the house, have my lunch, which very often consisted of rye bread and beans, and walk back to the school. So, talking about the school, it was it had a very good student body. It was a junior high school, so I went there until including the 9th year, the 9th grade, which meant that I spent the equivalent of the first year in the junior high school. And then when it came time to go to the regular high school for the remaining 3 years, I decided I would want to go to either Stuyvesant High School or Brooklyn Tech. And the reason was because I was good in math. Now, Stuyvesant High School I discounted immediately because the educational program there was to prepare someone for college. And I knew that was not for me, you know, at least on a full-time basis.
Because of financial.
Because of the financial conditions. Brooklyn Tech had a variety of programs. It was to begin with, it wasn't a scholarship school, but you had to take an exam, and it was a selective school based on the exam. And so I decided to do that with the knowledge, I guess I knew that at the time, that I would have to go another 4 years, which was the case. So I had a year of high school and junior high school, And I had another 4 years in Brooklyn Tech. So actually, I went to high school for 5 years. But I did it because I felt that after graduating from Brooklyn Tech, I would have enough background to go out and get a job. So I went into one of their programs called the Structural Technology Program. And it was a precursor to structural engineering, but on a high school level. The reason, incidentally, that it was another 4 years is because in those programs at Tech, they had a college prep program also. The college prep program was for those who wanted to go on to college immediately, full-time, which of course was not for me. So they had a lot of technical programs, one of which I took. And when I graduated from Brooklyn Tech, I applied for a couple of jobs. One, I remember two, one of which I got. And the one I'm about to tell you now, I did not get. And that was with Bell Labs. Now, Bell Labs doesn't exist today, but at that time, it was the research arm of AT&T. As you may know, AT&T was the only telephone company out there. And so AT&T provided telephone service, but they had Bell Labs as its research, and the other division they had was called Western Electric, which did the manufacturing. So research, manufacturing, and then the service of telephone. So I applied to Bell Labs. They gave me a test which involved working on the board. Working on the board means a drafting board. And I thought I did okay. And I'm sure I did okay because at Brooklyn Tech I was in the upper 10% of the graduating class. And that was selective in terms of the students they took. And so I must have been a very good student, or at least reasonably good. But when I finished the test at Brooklyn Tech, at Bell Labs, I sat down for an interview with this gentleman, and I remember it to this day. And he asked me a number of questions, of course, and he's looking at my application. And those years, it was not illegal for the application to ask for your religion. It is today, and has been for years. You can't do that today. So my religion was there, and he said to me, "Where were your parents born?" So, of course, I had to answer the question. I was not going to say to him, "Son of your business." So I told him my father was born in Russia, my mother was born in Poland. In retrospect, and I didn't get the job, incidentally. In retrospect, why was he asking me where my parents were born? What did that have to do with the kind of job I could do, or the type of person I was? So obviously I had to do with the religion. Anyway, I didn't get that job.
Did you ever think about not listing your religion? Was that an option that went through your head?
Never thought about denouncing my religion or pretending that I was not Jewish, no.
So, Jad, talking about religion, and then we'll later get back into the second job.
Okay.
Did you identify yourself as being Jewish as a child? Did you attend synagogue? Did you observe holidays? Were you bar mitzvahed?
We didn't attend synagogue. My grandfather did. He was a religious person, and he would go to synagogue frequently. I could say every morning. I don't remember. Frequently, to a synagogue, which was down in the basement. I remember this on Lincoln Avenue, a couple blocks from the house. And when it came time for me, when I was 13. I was not ready to be bar mitzvah. I had never gone to Hebrew school. And when I asked my mother and father why I hadn't gone to Hebrew school, they said they couldn't afford it. Okay. But at 13, I decided I wanted to be bar mitzvah because I felt that sometime in the future, I might look back and say, why wasn't I bar mitzvah? I'm unhappy that I wasn't bar mitzvah.
Was
so
your brother bar mitzvah?
probably, but I really don't remember. So I don't know. It could have been a number of factors. One of which I'm pretty sure I was looking ahead, and I felt I wanted to be bar mitzvah so that in looking back, I wouldn't be disappointed. And maybe because my friends were being bar mitzvah, so there could have been peer pressure of some sort. Anyway, since I couldn't read Hebrew, I couldn't go to a formal bar mitzvah. So my grandfather said on Monday and Thursday mornings, you can go to synagogue and say a prayer, and that would be the equivalent of it would be considered bar mitzvah. So how did I learn to say that prayer? Well, my grandfather would say the prayer, and it was written phonetically, and I would read it phonetically. My grandfather would correct me in terms of pronunciation, and I memorized it. And I thought I was in pretty good shape. So when it came to having the bar mitzvah, which was probably on a Thursday morning, prior to my going to school, they stood me at a lectern, and on either side of me, I remember this, on either side of me there was a man who probably was in the 50s, 60s, whatever. Of course, they looked very old to me. I was 13. And they said, okay, go to it. And I started the prayer. And whatever the prayer started with, by the time I finished pronouncing that first word, they were already up to the fifth word. I was lost. So all I did was open and close my mouth, pretending I was saying the prayer. So the
Did they
intent,
have a celebration afterwards, or?
yeah, the intent was good. I mean, the intent was there. I felt I was bar mitzvah because I wanted to be. We didn't have anything after that other than my mother made some honey cake and what's the other cake? The white cake?
Pound cake?
Sponge cake. And at the back of the synagogue, they set up a table, and the cake was put out there, I guess, with some wine. And the congregants would come back and partake. And I remember there's this one gentleman who would take some piece of cake and stuff in his pocket. Well, that's understandable. Things were tough in those years.
And then you went to school.
And then I went to school, yeah, right. And that was my bar mitzvah.
Okay, so let's get a little bit into, do you remember your family being political at all? Do you remember your father being somewhat of an intellectual? How would you describe your parents and your siblings?
I don't remember anything political being said. My father read a Yiddish paper called a Tug, translated means the day. And in those years, there were quite a few Yiddish papers. And they went from left-leaning to right-leaning. The left-leaning paper, there may have been others, but one that was prominent was the Forwards. He did not read that. He read the Tug, as I said. And I think the Tug may have been a middle-of-the-roader in terms of, political...
Do you remember talking about politics at the dinner table, or
No, I don't. My brother read, of course, he read the English paper. He read the World Telegram, which was not a leftist, not a right. It was perhaps a little more to the right than the Times was, So he...
And how do you think your friends would have described you as a teenager? How would they have described you as a teenager, as a friend? What do you think they would have said about you?
Well, first of all, they didn't call me Harold. It was called Lefty. That was a nickname. I was friendly with everybody, as far as I can remember. There were some I liked more than others, obviously. There was a group of us. I was close with some than I was with others. It was a group of guys that we played ball. We talked about ball afterwards. We hung out on Eastern Parkway in the evening, listened to the Yankee ball game. Jeff will be happy with that. And it was a good life. I really had a good life, in spite of the fact that there was no money to speak of, and I didn't need money.
You
My-
didn't
my
feel
needs were met.
you didn't feel deprived.
I did not feel deprived, no.
Were your friends from a similar background?
Yeah, they're lower middle class, lower middle class.
Jewish?
Whether they were at the same level of financial income, I don't know. I think they were better off than we were generally. I think so. I think one of them, at least one, may have had a car. Parents may have had a car. Yeah, because I remember being in the car when Joe Louis and Max Smelling, remember that? Fought, and it was being put on the radio, over the radio, yeah. So they were in better shape, probably. But it didn't, nobody knew the difference, really.
And how would you?
I don't think any of them went to camp, not that I can remember. We played ball in the schoolyard, and it was like a camp,
And were you close to your siblings, or how do you remember Aunt Roz and Uncle Sidney? What were they like?
Well, to begin with, my brother was 10 years older, so that, you're dealing with a different culture, essentially. He grew up having different friends, going to work, going to college, going to work, whatever. So that was very different. But I always felt that he was, not a father, but he was looking after me, to whatever extent. My sister Roz, who was 6.5 years older than I, again, I don't remember this, but what I was told, she resented having to take me along with her at times when she was with her friends, because I guess my father or mother couldn't be with me for whatever reason. So that's about it. So the age difference did call for for closeness as I was growing up. Which I had my friends, they had their friends, different groups.
Okay, so you talked about the first job you didn't get with Bell Labs.
Okay.
What position did you end up getting? And then tell us a little bit about your first early work experience and how you ended up serving in World War II.
Well, my first work experience was with a firm called Mayer Manufacturing. And at the time, they were making kitchen cabinets, steel kitchen cabinets. Well, I'm not quite sure whether that was before or after something else. Let's assume that's the case. So they were manufacturers of steel kitchen cabinets. I applied to a job there, and obviously I was taken. And I was a draftsman. So I would draw up and design to some extent these kitchen cabinets. And I would lay them laid out so that they could be various parts of the cabinet could be manufactured. They had a manufacturing plant there. I was about to say something, I've forgotten.
How long did
So
you
I
work
was doing.
there?
So I got the job, and I was making $15 a week for 5.5 days of the week. And on Saturday, essentially what I would do is clean the toilet and clean up around the place. Monday to Friday, I'd be working on the board. And occasionally I would go out into the shop and see what was doing. And I even learned how to weld. I was curious, so I learned how to weld. But just, as a pastime. While I was working, after high school obviously, I started to go to college at night, and I went to what was called Brooklyn Polytechnic Institute. It's now Polytechnic University. It's now part of NYU. And went at night for a year and a half and started civil engineering.
When did you do your homework? If you were working all day and going to school at night?
On the train, to some extent. When I got home, did some. But I remember I never did homework on the weekend. Weekend was my time. So everything was done by Friday night.
And how would you spend your weekends?
I was with my friends, playing ball, sitting around, talking, whatever we did. I don't know, what young guys do. So to repeat, I started in civil engineering, and at the end of a year and a half, I was beginning to find that it was a problem for me, not in terms of getting the grade, but in terms of going at night. I don't know. I guess I must have gone 3-4 nights a week, something of that order. And I'm not a night person, so it was beginning to get to me rather. And then I was drafted. At the end of the year and a half, I was
How old were you?
taken into service. I was 19 and a half. Remember, I graduated high school at 18. Normally I would have graduated at 17, but because I went for 5 years, it was 18. And I worked for a year and a half and went to school at night, and then I was drafted as a service. And a little interesting story. We had a report.
This was what year? This was
1943. So we had a report to an Albemarle movie from where we were going to be taken over to one of the bases. And when I walked into this lobby, where a lot of guys waiting for us to be picked up, there was this group of guys around this one big, heavy fellow. And I said, "What's going on here? Who is he?" And they said, "That's Zero Mostel." I think you all remember Zero Mostel.
Mm-hmm.
And I had heard the name. And so we were picked up and we were taken out to Camp Upton, which was way out on the island, for our basic training. No, it wasn't a basic, for to be held until we went to basic training. And that night of the day we got out to Camp Upton, Zero Mostel was going to entertain. He had a routine about the Japanese. And I volunteered to be an usher so that I could sit up front. So sure enough, there was a seat up front, and I sat up front, and I had a good seat. We were then shipped out, and we were shipped down to Miami Beach for basic training, because I was in the U.S. Army Air Force. In those years it was called the Army Air Force. Ultimately became the Air Force, a separate corps. And I was in the U.S. Army Air Force, by luck, I think, because I was told that depending upon the month in which you went in to the service, the need for a particular department of the Army, Navy, or whatever it may be, was put out there, and at the time I went in, supposedly the U.S. Army Air Force needed people. During basic training, which was, as I say, at a hotel in not Palm Beach, what did I say?
Miami Beach.
Miami Beach, thank you, in Miami Beach. We get up early in the morning, we go out for marches and training, you have a drill instructor. And I remember that one night I had guard duty out on the beach, and they gave me a rifle. And I tell you, I was scared, because they were concerned about the submarines in those years. And they knew there were Germans from the submarines who had left the submarine and gone on to U.S. soil, somewhere along those, Miami Beach or elsewhere. So I didn't know what was going to come, but so it was dark. I was alone, and I was a little concerned as I walked up and down. Let's see, that was Miami Beach, basic training, and from there I was shipped. Oh, when I entered the U.S. Army Air Force, gave us a battery of tests. I don't know if it was after basic training or before, probably after. They gave us a battery test somewhat similar, I guess, to an intelligence test. And based on that, they then indicated that they thought you should go into this part of the Air Force or that part or whatever. And I remember they giving me 3 choices based upon the results for my test, one of which was the Weather Service. Another was, and I would have to go to school for that, obviously. Another was to be a link trainer instructor. Now, the link trainers were used to train pilots. Today it's all computerized, and today if you go into where a pilot is trained, it's as if you were sitting in a cockpit today, as if you're sitting in a cockpit and you see before you the landing strip and everything else around you, okay? It's literally as if you're flying the plane. In those years, you sat in a little enclosure and you would move levers and things of that sort. That was the link trainer. So that was the second choice. And the third choice, I don't remember. So anyway, I decided I prefer going into the Weather Service. And they sent me to Grand Rapids, where I went to school. And when we entered the school at Grand Rapids, I was being trained as a weather observer. In other words, you would look at the clouds and report what they are. You would send up balloons and get readings in terms of temperature and velocity and direction and so forth. And then you would plot maps indicating, giving that information. And based upon these maps, the weather forecaster would determine how the air mass was moving and so forth, and would forecast as the front coming in, we're going to have snow, we're going to have rain, and so on. So anyway, so I was being trained as a weather observer, but they told us that the top 10% of the graduating class would then go on to forecasting school. Now remember, the first quarter or month or whatever is when the grades came out, I was top banana. I was number 1. But I wasn't when I graduated. But I was within that 10% when I graduated. And by that time, they had enough forecasters. They didn't need any more. So I remained a weather observer. And once again, I was lucky. Because I was, well, from there, let me give you that story. You've heard this, I think, but I'll give it to you again. When we graduated, they put up on the board that Mr. Jones, Private Jones is going here, Private Smith is going there, and so forth. And for me, they had me going into New York to be stationed as a weather observer. But they did not give the location of where I was to report. But I didn't have to report immediately. None of us did. They gave us time to go back home and have a little bit of a delay en route. So when the time came for me to report, the day before, I said, okay, I look at my orders, and there's nowhere for me to go other than New York. So I went to Manhattan. I was living in Brooklyn, and on Times Square they had a recruitment booth, and I went up to them and I said, I don't know where I'm supposed to go. I got to report tomorrow. They said, we don't know either. But there is a Coast Guard station. I don't know why Coast Guard, but there was a Coast Guard station, and they said it's on whatever street. Go there and they may be able to help you. And I went there, and the guy says, "Yeah, we know where you have to go." Of course, they knew I was, I guess it said weather observer. And they said, "Well, we have to take you." So they took me over to one of the buildings, which happened to be an AT&T building in Manhattan somewhere. They had an armed guard down in the lobby, and they took me to one of the floors, and that's where I had to be. And the reason it was difficult to find is because it was a very important building. It was the center for all of the metropolitan area in terms of controlling aircraft. The Aircraft Control Center. And it was there that they knew whether or not the planes that were flying should be flying, or whether or not they were possibly from enemy sources. So I was there for a period of time, and they, the New Yorker hotel,
Sure.
that turned into barracks, essentially. And so we stayed there, and occasionally I was able to get home, actually, and stayed home. And then I got my orders to go down to Trinidad, which was in the Caribbean. And at the time, the Caribbean was considered a war zone. And it was considered a war zone because of the U-boat activity. A lot of ships were being sunk by these U-boats, German U-boats. And they issued us a rifle. War zone. Of course, I was not involved with any shooting or anything of that sort, but so I was in a war zone, I don't know, maybe 3, 4, 5 months. And then by that time, they had taken care of the U-boats to the extent that they were no longer a big threat, as they took it off the war. I think if you were in a war zone, you got an additional pay, I think. I don't remember what it was. Anyway, then it went back to being, just an area. And I was in Trinidad for a while, and then I was sent over to,
Cuba.
where did I go? Not Aruba.
Cuba?
No, what's next to Aruba? It's Dutch. Aruba's Dutch also. Where people go.
Curacao?
Where? Curacao, thank you.
Curacao.
To Curacao. Stayed there for a period of time. We had air bases there. I was stationed at air base. Then they sent me to French Guiana. And French Guiana was an air base out in the jungle. But of course you had, everything there at the air base. And I remember there was one individual who worked there. He was a civilian. And he had one leg shorter than the other, something like this. And when we spoke to him, we'd say, "What happened to your leg?" He would tell us that he had been on Devil's Island. You know Devil's Island? So it's all French Guiana. It no longer exists. In those years, and prior to that, people who were convicted of a crime in France were sent to Devil's Island. And it was a hellhole. You know the name Dreyfus?
Mm-hmm.
Captain Dreyfus? He was sent to Devil's Island. And why did this guy have one leg shorter than the other? Because he broke his leg while he was on Devil's Island. They never set it, or didn't set it properly, and the bone, instead of being like this, it was like this. So he had one shorter than the other. And then from there, they shipped me to Cuba, or sent me to Cuba. And while I was at these various islands, we had softball teams, amongst other things. And so I was on a softball team, I was a first baseman, and so forth. And I was a pretty good hitter in those days. So they were sorry to see me go, they really were. And so then, went to Cuba, and I spent 10 months, I remember the amount of time there, I spent 10 months in Cuba at what was called Batista Air Base. Batista was then the dictator in control of Cuba. San Antonio de los Peños. That was the name of the town. And periodically we would go to Havana, it was about 30 miles away. And there was a Jewish population, they had a fairly large Jewish population in Havana. And they took the soldiers under their wing, and we'd eat, occasionally we'd have dinner with them. And we went out with the young girls, our age and so forth. And I think we can stop now and maybe check, okay?
That's good.
I think we've had more than enough,
Yes.
I can tell.
I can tell. That's good.
Yeah.
You did great.
Very good.
Yeah, I put you to sleep, it must be
Ruth
good.
found it very exciting.
Did she? Why, she fell asleep?
She's sleeping.
Oh, she.
Good afternoon, Grandpa.
Good afternoon.
We're here on July 30th, 2016, and we're picking up on our oral history. And this will be the start of part 3.
Okay, fine.
So we left off with you discussing your deployment to Havana. And you
Well,
had...
actually Cuba, if I can
Cuba.
just correct you.
Correct. So would you mind picking up where you left off? You were discussing Havana, how you guys would go into, or Cuba, how you would go into Havana now and again. And would you mind picking up with your deployment and your service?
Well, that was pretty much for the time I was in Cuba, except this might be a little interesting story. When we went to Havana, well, to one of the beaches, I should say. There were a lot of beaches in Havana that were gorgeous. So periodically we'd go to a beach, and we were there with some of the young women I spoke of earlier, and it must have been in Havana because something happened subsequently. So as these young girls were sitting on the beach, I was some distance away, and I decided to run towards them, and as if I was going to run into them, and then I cut across. I crossed my legs, cut across, like a running back in football, except I clipped my toe against her thigh, or against her bone. And it hurt, but that was it. And that night we went dancing in one of the very nice hotels, Hotel Tropicana, which is supposedly a 5-star, or was a 5-star hotel at the time. And I danced, and it hurt, and the toe turned black and blue. That was it, until I got back to the base, and it hurt a lot, so I went to the doctor, they took an x-ray, and they found I had a broken bone. And they put me on crutches. But what is even more interesting, unfortunately, is that while I was on crutches, during that period, and remember I was at an air base, we had some planes flying overhead practicing, and there were a couple of hotshot pilots, and they were doing maneuvers that they shouldn't have been doing, and one of them unfortunately lost control, and the plane dove into the ground and went through one of the barracks, right through the barracks. Happened to be the barracks next to where I was situated. And of course we all ran out, and me on my crutches. So a lot of people were killed, and that's what happens. That's about it in terms of Cuba.
What years were you there?
It was probably 1945, 44, 45. Because the war ended in 45, and I was discharged. I was discharged actually from Cuba. I went back to the States. I went to Fort Dix. I was discharged. I was supposed to be discharged on December 6th. And lo and behold, I lost my papers. So you can imagine what my feeling was. Am I going to get out? They don't have my papers, I was really shook up. They found it the next day, and so I was discharged December 7th. December 7th, of course, is the anniversary of Pearl Harbor. So December 7th, 1945. Yes, Jeff?
I want to ask a question, if I may. What was your pay when you were in the Army?
I don't remember.
No, remember?
No.
Can you you mentioned Pearl Harbor. Can you, do you remember where you were during Pearl Harbor, and what was
Yes.
the reaction of
Yes, I
those
do.
that were around you or the community?
Don't remember. It was a Sunday. I was with friends up in somebody's apartment, and we were watching a football game. It must have been the Giants against, I don't remember whom. And of course the announcement came through that Pearl Harbor had been attacked, and I guess we figured, well, here's the war. And I guess the following day, President Roosevelt must have indicated that we were at war with Japan.
Was there a feeling that war was inevitable, or that America would kind of sit on the sidelines while Germany and Japan were?
Well, we were involved to the extent that we were supplying Great Britain with destroyers. I think we sent 50 destroyers, if I remember correctly. They called the Lend-Lease. So we had our hand in a war, and of course there were people, Americans, who had volunteered to fly with the RAF and the Canadian Air Force. But on the other hand, there were those who were against the war, and many of them were fascist. You know, we had our people in the States who were sympathizers with Germany. In fact, I don't know if it's true or not, I've been told that here in the Livingston Manor area, they had the Bund, the German Bund.
I've heard they were upset.
Yeah.
I have a question also. At that time, what did you hear about what was happening with the Holocaust? Did you hear that there were Jews in the camps being exterminated? What did you hear about that? And then subsequently, what did you hear about what Roosevelt was doing about that?
I can't tell you what I heard, but I don't remember whether I heard anything about the Holocaust at the time or not, because there's been so much about the Holocaust since that it sort of all blends in.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know when my awareness started. As far as Roosevelt was concerned, we didn't realize at the time that he had decided not to bomb the railroad tracks that was, carrying on which the trains were traveling, carrying people to the camps, or bombing the camps themselves. That came out much later. Yeah.
Do you have any family that you know of that passed away during the Holocaust? Or?
Just an assumption that my father's family, and I indicated that he had siblings who had remained in Russia. I don't know what happened to them. I assume, depending what part of Russia he was from, they might have been overrun by the German army, and if they were, then that was the end of that for them. If they were the eastern part, maybe they were able to move out of there, or maybe the Russians gave them a hard time. I don't know. Yes.
Were you drafted into the army,
I was
or
drafted.
did you enlist?
No, as I indicated earlier on, I was drafted while I was working, and I had been going to school at night. The engineering school at night, and that was it.
And one other question about the war. I know you mentioned that you were discharged on Pearl Harbor Day in 1945. Where were you, or what were you doing when you heard about that the war was over?
I must have been in Cuba, and I just don't remember what I was doing.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was the feeling of the country in the aftermath? What did New York feel like after the war?
Well, I wasn't in New York at the time, but on the newsreel, those years you used to have newsreels prior to the movies. So on the newsreels, of course, you had moving pictures of what was taking place, and Times Square was one of the popular places that was being filmed, and of course, people were going crazy. And the famous picture of the sailor kissing this young woman. So it was euphoria. We were out of a war that we had been in for a period of 4 years. A lot of deaths took place. And
So after you were discharged, can you describe how you found work, or what you did in the immediate aftermath of your discharge?
when I was discharged, I went back to school. as a full-time student. Went back to Polytechnic Institute of Brooklyn, where I had been going prior to the war, prior to being drafted, and I had been there at night. So I went back as a full-time student. Thanks to the GI Bill of Rights. And if I remember correctly, they paid the tuition, the GI Bill did, and I think they gave a stipend of maybe $20 or something like that, a week, a month, I don't even remember, which was not sufficient. Of course, my mother was widowed. I was living with my mother. She was working in A&S at the time. That's a department store in Brooklyn. And I had to make some additional money. So when classes were over, I'd get on a train and I'd go out to Greenpoint to work at the same place I worked at prior to the war. They took me back on a part-time basis. And I used to do my, as I indicated previously, I think I used to do my homework on the train, going there, coming back. Wherever I could do it, I did it. And I worked there during the time I was going to school, that 4-year period. At the end of, and then I met Grandma Goldie while I was in school. I probably was a senior at the time. And again, once again, going back a little bit, just as I had gone to high school for 5 years, I indicated that previously, I went to college for more than 4 years for my undergraduate degree, because I had gone a year and a half at night prior to going to surface, and then a full 4 years afterwards. So really, I had more than 4 years. And the other interesting thing is that at that time, in order to get an engineering degree, it was 144 credits, where a typical degree for a liberal arts student was maybe 120 credits, something like that. And that's was labs, where 3 hours of lab was 1 credit, so it was a heavy load while you were going to school. Yes?
You mentioned that you met Grandma Goldie right after that. Would you tell us how you met her and where?
Sure.
And how old were you and what year?
I met her, I guess I must have been about 25, maybe the latter part of 24, the early part of 25, something like that.
How old was she at the time?
Well, she was 4.5 years younger. And how did I meet her? Well, one night, a number of us was hanging around on the street, in front of a candy store, which was a typical thing to do. And the question was, what are we going to do tonight? So someone suggested we go to the Brooklyn Jewish Center, where they were having a basketball game. Now, the background on that is that in those years, well, to begin with, there were no Jewish centers in Brooklyn or in New York, period. I don't believe there was a Jewish center. They were all synagogues. If you went out of town into the small communities, small cities or the towns, and there was a Jewish population, they would have a Jewish center, but they didn't have it in New York, to my knowledge. So it was synagogues, and each synagogue, pretty much, or a good number of synagogues, had basketball courts. They had big gyms, good-sized gym with a basketball court. And there was a league of basketball teams sponsored by these synagogues. And on these teams, you had top 5 players. In those years, a lot of the college basketball players were Jewish, interestingly enough. And many of them would play in those leagues. So the games were good games. So in any case, we went to the Brooklyn Jewish Center that night to see a basketball game. And do you want to stop this? No? Okay. For those of you who might not have heard, Jeff's phone was ringing, cell phone. Okay. So we went to the basketball game. I assume with the knowledge that there would be a dance afterward, but I'm not sure. We went primarily for the basketball game. And there was a dance afterwards. This was, I guess, typical of those games. And friend of mine, Harold Cohn, asked Grandma Goldie to dance. How he came to it, I don't know. And then he said, Harold, would you like to dance with her? Why he asked me, again, I don't know. Maybe they didn't hit it off, whatever. And so I danced with her and got to talking. Where are you from? And she was from the Lower East Side. And I said, well, what are you doing here in Brooklyn? She said, well, a number of friends, her girlfriends, and she decided, gee, let's go into one of these synagogues in Brooklyn where they're having the basketball games and dances afterwards. Actually, they were interested in the dances, not the basketball game. And maybe we'll meet some college guys from Brooklyn. And sure enough, that's what happened. So she took us from the Lower East Side. I said, the Lower East Side? I wasn't particularly happy with that, traveling to the Lower East Side, but we got along very well, obviously, and it continued. Yes?
Where did you take her on your first date?
I don't know if it was my first date or not, but I remember this. It may have been my first date. Fort Tyrone Park? We went up to Fort Tyrone Park, which overlooks the Hudson, and we went picnicking. So instead of a blanket, we took a roll of paper, this wrapping paper, and we put it on the ground, and we lay on the wrapping paper, and overlooked the Hudson. We had a terrific time. So I think that was the first time we went out. Yeah.
So we did want to ask a couple more questions, Grandpa, about your education and your schooling.
Okay.
Can you talk about how you, what other degrees you got and how you got started in portions of your career?
Okay, so when I graduated from Polytechnic Institute of Brooklyn as a mechanical engineer, mechanical engineering degree, and I did well. I was in the top 10%. Once again, I keep referring to that because that seems to be where I've been all these years. It was 1949, and things were tough for engineers. And I remember Uncle Sidney asking me if I would join him in his business. He was a customer peddler. Now, I don't know if you know what a customer peddler is, but a customer peddler is one who goes to people's homes and sells them merchandise of one sort or another. It could be jewelry, it could be slip covers for furniture, it could be clothing, whatever. And so I remember that a lot of the guys that were graduating with me were envious of me that I had a job to go into. It was really tough then. So I started working with him, and he wanted me to go into business with him, to become a partner. And he said he would be involved primarily with the paperwork, and I would be going out and doing, going from house to house pretty much. And I didn't like that idea. I was not happy with the business. It was okay. I did that while I was going to school. I worked part-time for him. I was going to go to college. And I worked with him for a while after graduation. But it really wasn't my cup of tea. Anyway, while I was going on my rounds, working with him, I was down in downtown Brooklyn. I passed a school that had just started up pretty much a couple of years prior to that, sort of an experimental school. It was called New York State College of Technology, or Applied Technology, something like that. I think there were 5 that had been set up in the state. And lo and behold, as I'm walking past the school, here comes out of the door Eugene Kleiner. And I knew him because I had gone to Poly with him. But he had graduated a semester or a year before I did. And he was teaching at the school. And he said to me, they're hiring in the Department of Mechanical Technology. I said, really? Gee, I think I might like to teach. And the reason was because when I went to Brooklyn Tech, there were a couple of guys I used to tutor. I was, as I said, I was a decent student, and they weren't quite as good, so I would tutor them, and I enjoyed doing that. So when I heard from him that they were interviewing, I said, gee, I'd like to apply, and I applied, and I was interviewed by the chairman of the department, and I was offered a position. So that's how I got there. Getting back to Eugene Kleiner, it's an interesting story. He was there about a year or two when he came up for promotion. There were different levels, and he was denied promotion. So he decided to leave. And he left and went to work at, I think it was Fairchild Semiconductor, who was, that organization, that firm, was one of the first in semiconductor research and production. And I don't know exactly what happened, but he and a number of other people were bought out. I don't know. How it happened, I don't know. And he obviously came up with some bucks, and he and a couple of others formed a venture capital, and they went out to the San Francisco area, Silicon Valley, and formed this venture capital firm, which became very prominent in the field. I think they probably were the most prominent and the largest of the venture capital firms for many years, if not still today. And the name of the firm was Kleiner, Perkins, Bayer, and maybe one or two other partners. And I used to see them in the paper, the business section, from time to time. While I was teaching at the college, I decided to go for an advanced degree, for a master's. And I learned that Brook College, which was also part of City University, had just developed, or was starting a program called Industrial Management for Engineers. And I thought that would be an appropriate field of study for me to go into. It would give me diversity in terms of teaching different courses. And so I went for that at night, and I got my MBA, I think it was in 1956. In addition, while I was teaching, I was put up for promotion, went through the rank of assistant professor, associate professor, and ultimately became a full professor. And upon retirement, I then had the title of Professor Emeritus, of course, which still exists today, for whatever it's worth. While I was working, in addition, I decided to go for my professional engineer's license, and I took a series of tests. I think I had to sit for 2 days. Each day was six hours, dealing with all different phases of engineering subject, and passed the test, and I got my professional engineer's license, and I maintained that license until I retired. I think that this sort of takes care of my working years.
Grandpa, why did you go into engineering? Were there other fields you were considering?
I may have indicated that earlier on. It was a sequence of events. One, to repeat very quickly, when it was time for me to go to high school, I had to make a decision as to what kind of high school I wanted to go to. I could have gone to a local high school, such as Boys High School, or a high school which would cater to those who were good in math. Of course, I was a decent math student. And so, as I said previously, I considered two high schools. One was Stuyvesant High School, and the other was Brooklyn Technical High School. And I eliminated Stuyvesant High School because it prepares you for college, and I decided I would go to Brooklyn Technical High School because I could take, they had a number of different courses which prepared you to go out into industry. And so that's why I took chose Brooklyn Technical High School. I had to take an exam to get in there, incidentally. It wasn't a scholarship, but it was a school where I don't know how to state this. It was selective. Okay. And from there, I decided to go into engineering school, and that's how it all happened. Yeah. Now, I retired from teaching at age 62, and the reason I retired at that age is because I was eligible to retire, number one, and number two, they were giving us an incentive to retire. So I had 35 years of teaching, and if we retired at the time I did, they gave us the equivalent of 3 additional years of teaching. So it's as if I actually worked for 38 years rather than 35 years. In retrospect, going back, and I felt I wanted to retire also because I didn't like the way the college was going at the time. But in retrospect, I think I would have been better off if I had stayed till at least 65, or maybe even a little older, because I enjoyed teaching and I enjoyed making a decision, and I was heading up a department. So that was it.
Great.
Okay, Dad. We're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about your marriages. You were married twice, and now luckily you have a relationship with Ruth for 24 years. So let's go back a little bit to your first marriage with my mother, Grandma Goldie. You talked about how you met her. Can you talk a little bit about what you remember of her, what your marriage was like, and then let's get a little bit into what it was like being a parent.
Well, she was a doll, and she was loved just about by everybody. And I've always said, of the two of us, she was the better person, and I mean it. Unfortunately, of course, she died at a very early age. She just turned 51. But there's one story I want to tell that I think is interesting. Before we were married, of course, we were engaged, and she went up to this area, actually. I think it was Loch Sheldrick, or one of the other towns close by, where she worked at a hotel, and that hotel had a camp for kids. As the parents would be at the hotel, and the kids were being taken care of at the camp. And she was one of the counselors. And so I came up to visit her, I guess it was on a Friday night, or Saturday perhaps, and we decided I would sleep over. So the question is, where was I going to sleep? So they had, one of the buildings dealt with the female counselors, another building dealt with the male counselors. Well, I didn't know any of the male counselors, obviously, so she and her fellow female counselors set up a cot in the female counselors' building where I went to sleep for the night. And I remember this, that in the morning, someone would come around and make sure that whomever should be getting up was getting up. And so they said, Harold, get out of here, get out of here. Somebody's coming. So I had to get out of that cot and run off somewhere. But that was an incident that I remember. I think we had a good life. Of course, it was a short life, unfortunately, together.
The first year, did you live with your in-laws?
Yeah. When I married her, I was 26. I just graduated from college. She was teaching. She started teaching when I think she was 21. And to save some money, we moved in with her folks, who lived in, as I said before, they lived in downtown Manhattan. And we lived there for a year and a half. And, almost immediately after we had moved in, she developed a rash throughout her body. I think they called it dermatoma. I don't know exactly what they call it, but they said it must have started somewhere and spread. And she was full of a rash. And the dermatologist said you have to take baths. I forget exactly what it was. So she would take baths on this subject, and she was tinted with the color of this substance, whatever it was. And fortunately, it worked. You know, she got rid of this rash. And so, as I said, we lived there for a year and a half with her parents. And they were wonderful people. I called her mother Mom, I called her father Pop. And at the end of the year and a half, we moved to Queens, to Forest Hills in Queens, where a new development of garden apartments had been put up. And we had, by this time, we had met Aunt Rainey and Uncle Bob. And they moved to the same development. We moved there first, and they followed us. And how did we meet Uncle Bob and Aunt Rainey? Well, as I said, Mom was teaching at a school in downtown Manhattan. Uncle Bob was teaching at the same school, and they liked each other. And so Uncle Bob and Aunt Rainey invited us over to their place. And their place was in the basement of this building. I think it was maybe a 2-story building. They lived in the basement, and where the burner was, you know, the coal burner and so forth. And why there? Because then, and this must have been, let's see, we were married in 1949, so it must have been 1949, 1950. It was extremely difficult to get apartments. And so I felt fortunate to be able to get this basement apartment. And so we visited with them. I met them for the first time, obviously. And Aunt Rainey made a chocolate, a cream chocolate pudding pie. Yeah, cream chocolate pudding pie. And I remember to this day because I loved it. and we became very strong friends, as you know, and our kids, and we had the kids in Forest Hills, the garden apartment, as they did, and Aunt Rainey and Mom used to watch the kids together and so forth, and the kids grew up together until that's Mom and I, decided we needed a larger place, and so we moved to another garden apartment, which was in Whitestone. That was a 2-bedroom, I think 1 bath. But the kids slept in the 2nd bedroom. That was you and Uncle Michael, of course. And once again, Aunt Rainey and Uncle Bob followed us, and they picked up an apartment in the same community. And again, the kids were within walking distance of one another. So, you grew up with Richard, with Susan and Richard. Unfortunately, where we were living, it was 2 stories. There was an apartment upstairs. We lived downstairs, and the people upstairs had a kid, and he was extremely noisy, and they were noisy, and was not comfortable. So we decided that we had to get out of there for at least for the summer. I was off for the summer, and Mom was off for the summer. So early on, we bought a place in Lake Apatcong, a little house, and we were there for 2.5 years, 2.5 summers. And the third summer, in the middle of summer, I sold the place. I didn't feel it was for us. And then we had to decide where we would go next summer. And Jerry Rhodes, who was a colleague of mine at the college, we were talking one day, and I said to him, Jay, I wish there was a place I knew where to go for the summer. He said, why don't you join us? He said, a group of us, he and Sam and Blanche and the Rosamans, had been at a bungalow colony in Lake Champlain, and they decided they were going to leave and come to a bungalow colony in this area. And so he invited us over to his apartment to meet them, and we got along very well, and we decided to move to that bungalow colony along with, as I said, Sam and Blanche and Jerry and Helen Rhodes and Somers, and the Rosemans were there as counselors, and so that's how that group started, pretty much.
Tustin.
Tustin Mountain Lake was the name of the place. The first year we were there, Aunt Rosalind and Uncle Marvin asked me to join them as a counselor. They had started a teen tour business, and they had 40 kids, and they felt they needed additional counselors. So I left for 5 weeks, leaving Mom and you and Uncle Michael and your grandmother and grandfather, and took off for 5 weeks. I went cross country with them as a counselor, and came back, and I decided that in the near future I would take you all out cross country as well. And so the second year I spent a full summer at the at Tustin Mountain Lakes at the bungalow colony, and the third year we decided to go cross country. So we packed, I had a Chevrolet at that time, we packed a Chevrolet, and off we went cross country.
How old were Michael and Lori?
Uncle Michael was 10 and Lori was 7. And on the way cross country, we made a stop in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I had a cousin, and we visited with them, and then we just took off. And Sam and Blanche also did the same trip. The Somers did the same trip, and we met along the way. And an interesting story is that when we reached Yellowstone National Park, I was about to pull into a parking spot, and this son of a gun comes and shoots in front of me and takes the spot. And who was it? Sam Blanche. And their kids. So, we saw them there, of course. And when we got to San Francisco, we met the Somers accidentally, because they were checking into the same hotel we were checking into. And we met the Rhodes, Jerry and Helen Rhodes. They were out on that same trip. We met them at one of the national parks accidentally. So it was a very good trip. We were out 10 weeks. The last 3 weeks of that trip, we stopped off at Fort Collins in Colorado, where I took a national science course for those 3 weeks. And Mom and Michael and Lori did whatever they did. They went to the pool and so forth. And then at the end of that 3-week period, we headed home very quickly, because I had to go to work and Mom was back to teaching. So that was it.
Okay, Dad. What do you remember about being a parent for myself and Michael. What do you remember us as kids? What were we like?
Well, I
Any
remember
of the challenges?
You know, you were a joy. You really were a joy. Of course, as time went on, you became teenagers. It was less of a joy, perhaps. But my attitude was, you're teenagers. This is normal, being a teenager. And, you know, I guess I was a strong parent. I don't know, because you reacted to it, you more than Uncle Michael. And so I can understand it. You know, if I was tough on you, you know, you weren't going to enjoy it. But it was just my philosophy. I felt that I had grown up in tough times. I thought I was the better for it. You know, nobody owed me a living. I had to do what I had to do in order to survive. And I didn't want you or Michael to be in a position other than that. And hopefully it worked to your benefit.
So, in terms of being a parent, any specific advice that you would have for your own grandchildren as they, you know?
No, I each has to do to whatever they're comfortable with. I was comfortable doing what I did because I thought it was the best I could do as a parent. You know, it doesn't always work out that way, obviously. Whatever I did, frankly, not because it was for my benefit. I felt it was for the benefit of children. And that was paramount in my mind. And of course, the same was true in Mom's mind. So as far as grandchildren are concerned, they got to do what they're comfortable with and what they think is best for their kids.
Speaking of grandchildren, how do you remember Gary and Stephen and Julia as grandchildren? What are some of the memories you have of them?
Well, Gary was the first, of course, and I guess we spent the most time with Gary because by that time, when Gary was born, Grandma Goldie had died, and I was married to Grandma Ann, and so we used to take Gary, pick him up at preschool, I remember.
Forest Hills Jewish Center.
Yeah, and on the way to your apartment, we'd always stop and then we'd go in with him and buy him a cookie. And that was a routine. I don't know. Do you remember that, Gary? I don't know if you were very young at the time.
I do remember loving cookies.
Yeah. Right. And I think you, Lori, and Gary would come over to our place, to the house.
Jeff would meet us there.
Where,
Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah, he would have dinner at least once a week. So it was a close relationship in terms of proximity, which helps, of course, and I think we were comfortable with one another, wanted to be with one another. Steve came along. Oh well, Julia, of course, was up in Rochester, so I would see Julia only occasionally. Compared to seeing Gary, it was almost as if I hardly ever saw her, and that was obviously because of the lack of proximity. But we would go up to Rochester whenever we could, and she was, Grandpa's here, Grandpa. Steve came along when. Oh wait a minute! When it was when I had just met Ruth. Yeah. So wait a minute, Steve did not know Anne.
Correct.
Anne had died prior to Steve's being born. Yeah. Right. So Steve grew up with Ruth. And again, I guess we didn't spend as much time with Steve, I didn't, as I did with Gary, because by that time we were down in Florida for a period of time. So, we didn't see Steve as often. But I remember playing ball with Steve as I did with Gary. I remember Steve climbing up on the wall between you and between you and Mary's house. And I said, Steve, don't do that, because he was a little nothing at the time. So he was a daredevil. I remember that. Yeah.
And what do you remember of Julia?
Julia, I remember she had a terrific sense of direction. Yeah, because even as a young kid, you might say, why that? But it was so significant. When she was 3, 4, 5 years old, she remembered the direction in which to go. It was uncanny, and she was a warm kid.
So let's talk a little bit about Grandma Ann. We can talk about Matt, and then how you got to meet Ruth.
Grandma Ann.
How long were you married for?
How'd you meet him?
How did I meet Ann? Okay, let's go back there. After Mom had died, I didn't date for at least 7 months. And then finally I decided, well, okay. And so I had dates. People recommended women. And Aunt Randy and Uncle Bob were friendly with Ann's sister and brother-in-law, Bertha and Julie, through a common friend. And so Ann's husband had died, and I guess Aunt Randy must have said, gee, maybe this would be a good shidduch. So she recommended I take out Ann, Bertha's sister, and I did, and it clicked. We did very well together. And
How long were you married to her before she passed away?
11 and a half years. And well, for whatever it's worth, she died after we had just come back from signing a contract to sell the house. And I spoke to the real estate agent, and I said, can I get out of this? Because I was alone, I didn't know where to go. So at least if I could have stayed in the house for some period of time, I could have looked around and settled into something. And the real estate agent, whether it's true or not, I don't know, she said to me, as a seller, you can't get out of it. If you were the buyer and this had happened, you'd be able to get out of it. And maybe there's some justification, because as a buyer, if a spouse dies, for example, they might have a problem affording the house or getting a mortgage. Whereas the seller, you're getting the money, So the house had to go through, and Ann and we had rented a place down in Florida. We had been there previously and rented the same place, and so I decided to go to Florida, even though Ann was no longer with me. And the house.
I went to closing.
Yeah, the house went to closing in January. I think I went down in November, something like that. And you took over for me, and the house was closed. And another little interesting tidbit, I was going to drive down to Florida. And when I told one of my friends, I happened to be female, that I was going to drive to Florida, she said, you're going to be going into the motel alone, and being alone, and I just died not too long ago, it might be very difficult for you. He says, why don't you take the auto train? So I took the auto train and got down to Florida that way, and I spent, I guess, 3 months at the apartment.
How did you decide on Florida?
Pardon me?
How did you decide to go down to Florida? Why Florida?
Well, I was retired with Ann, and Ann and I decided that we'd sell this house, go to Florida, buy a place down there.
You were going to sell this house?
You know, it's
Oh.
yeah. She wasn't that happy. She was happy, but not enough that she wanted to stay put. So we thought we'd sell this place, to repeat, buy a place in Florida for the winter months, and the summer months we'd buy a place where Uncle Norman had his place, which was what they
Heritage
called
Heritage Hills.
Heritage Hills, right? And we looked at Heritage Hills, through a couple of apartments, and before anything could be done, she died. So that took care of that. And when I was down in Florida, I met Ruth. Oh, how did I meet Ruth? Anne had some friends who I had met and became friendly with, and we had been invited to a party, and we would drive, and friends asked me if I wanted to go with them. Of course, I hadn't met Ruth at the time, and while we were in the car, the wife said to me, "Harold, are you dating yet, or would you like to meet somebody?" And I said, "Yes, I started dating." She said, "Okay, I'll put the word out." The next thing I know is I get a call from her that she has a number of someone, namely Ruth. And I called Ruth, asked her for a date, and we went out for the first date. I didn't realize that this friend of mine, or Ruth of mine, didn't know Ruth. What had happened was that this person was up at a place up here, not too far from there, called Emerald Green, and they had a pool there, and she used to sit around the pool, and she met a friend of Ruth, and she said to this friend of Ruth, "I have a nice guy, you have a nice girl." And this friend of Ruth said, "Yeah, someone I know is widowed," and so she gave my friend Ruth's phone number. So, and of course, as I say, I called Ruth. So when I went out with Ruth, I referred to it as a double-blind date, because nobody knew anybody.
So what do you remember of that first date?
Well, I picked up, I went to Ruth. She had an apartment, as I said, in Florida, and she, as soon as she opened the door, I liked the looks of her. She was wearing, she had a nice shape, and of course, she was wearing slacks, which I liked. And she invited me in for a drink, and some hors d'oeuvres. Yeah, questions, Jeff?
And then you realized, I better not use the Groupon I have in my pocket on this one.
So, anyway, so we had a drink and some. Oh, when I called her, no. Prior to meeting her, I called her, of course, asking her to go out. And Ruth said, "Okay." She said, "How about going for a drink?" Right, Ruth? I think that's what she said, yeah. I said, "No, I don't want to go for a drink. I want to go out for dinner." I guess that impressed her. Now, the reason I wanted to go out for dinner primarily is because I had to eat somewhere. And I wasn't big on cooking. So, and I felt also, going out for dinner, I would be spending some time with whomever it was, and I'd get to know them. With a drink, it could be very quick and out the door, and wherever you might be. So to repeat, I went to her apartment to pick her up. She invited me in for a drink, and some hors d'oeuvres, and we talked and so forth. And I said, "I don't know the area. Do you have a restaurant you'd like to go to?" She said, "Well, there's a Chinese restaurant very close. We can walk there and have dinner." I said, "Fine." And we walked out of the building, and as we did, I said to her, "I see you have a pool. What's it like?" She said, "Well, do you want to take a look?" I said, "Yeah." And the reason I asked is because in those years I was swimming. So as we about to enter the pool, someone came out of the gate from the pool. You want me to tell the story, Ruth?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. And she said, "Hiya," whatever his name was, and he said, "Don't you talk to me."
Never asked her.
So, which was, it sounded to me as if he was a little off the wall, but, and he walked past, and that was it. And then when we went out to have dinner, and she told us she met some people there from her building. She told them the story, and they said, "Oh, I know." It seems from what Ruth tells me that he and she were each running for president of the building, and she won, and he lost. And so we had it in for her, I guess. I don't know. So anyway, we had dinner at the Chinese restaurant. We had a terrific time. You know, I had her in stitches. She's a laugher, and all I had to do was say Ruth, and she laughed. So all night long I was saying Ruth, 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 and she was in hysterics. And it took off from there. And Betsy, I moved in with her, and how do we get to Boca West? Of course, not everybody knows Boca West, but Boca West is a country club, and we got to it as follows. I was living with Ruth, but I went up north for a period of time. I guess it was a holiday to be with the family, and she didn't go up north. And when I got back, that night she had made a terrific meal. It was, what was it? With a crust. It was beef
Wellington.
Beef Wellington, right. And I tell you, it was as good as it could be. Now, not that I'm an expert in beef Wellington, but I had had beef Wellington coincidentally at the CIA, the Culinary Institute of America, some years back. And I sort of remember what it tasted like, and hers was superior. So I said to myself, ooh, I got myself a good cook here. Of course, she made it another time, it was terrible. But by then it was too late. So when I came back and she had that beef Wellington, she said to me, Harold, I'd like to move. I said, where? And she said, to Boca West. Now, coincidentally, I had been to Boca West a couple of times before. I had taken out someone that Naomi Barron had recommended. So I know a little about the place. But it was a country club, and I was not a country club person. You know, none of my friends nor I were country club people, except for one person, Harold Cohn, who was a country club person out of Long Island. So I was a little concerned, frankly. I thought it might be the type of atmosphere that I would not be comfortable with. I might not be comfortable with the people. But I said, look, if that's what you want, I'm willing to give it a shot. And if I feel uncomfortable and if it doesn't work out, then we'll have to talk about it. So it was an apartment that was available. That's why she was anxious to go there. She learned of the apartment through a cousin of hers, and she decided to buy the apartment, and we moved into Boca West. And of course, I moved with her, and you know, we maintained the apartment to this day.
Good
And
move.
I've been very happy there. What I did learn was that the type of person ran the gamut, from people with very simple tastes to people with extreme tastes. And so you find your own level, you know. And so we've developed a lot of friends there who are like us.
So, Dad, in being married to Anne and being with Ruth, you developed a big extended family. You know, so you had Matt and you had Mark and you had Susan and Marcy. So you talk a little bit about each of them and how that enriched your life. You know, first with Matt and then the others.
Well, to begin with, I think both I and Anne and Ruth were and are fortunate in that each of the extended families, for the three of us, once again, myself, Anne, and Ruth, we were fortunate that each of the extended families we were comfortable with. There were no problems. I got along very well with Matt, and got along very well with my family. When it came to Ruth, I feel I get along very well with her family, and they get along, as you know, very well with Ruth. Very close. So we were very fortunate. I've been fortunate, and they've been fortunate that the families came into play in a very positive manner. Because he has so many stories. Where with second marriages or second relationships or third, whatever it may be, there are children that just give the parents a very hard time. And you hear cases where children won't talk to their parents because they married somebody else. So that's the story there. And what was the other question? The additional question?
That was it.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if this is
Go ahead.
part of this. I think Grandpa should tell the story about how he and Goldie found the country house.
That's good.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Jeff, I don't know if you heard Jeff, he was speaking softly to Lori. He said perhaps...
A rare occurrence, I might add.
That's true.
He suggested I tell about how Goldie and I came to this house, in the country. It was a Sunday when...
What year also?
Oh, okay. It was 1970. It was April. And I get a call from Sam on a Sunday, Sam Oglies, and Sam says, "How about going for a drive somewhere?" I said, "Fine." He said he went into the New York Times, the real estate section, and came up with 3 model homes up in the country somewhere. And they could be a destination. I said, okay, fine. Now I gotta tell you that we had absolutely no thought of buying a home. Neither Goldie or I or Sam or Blanche. But it was a destination. So the first model home we were going to look at was east of the Hudson, and there's a college there, and I always have a problem coming. 2 names, part of SUNY, part of State University of New York. So we went there. I drove to the model home, which we could not find. So the next stop was a model home in Loch Sheldrick, which is in the Catskills. And I looked at the map, and there were a couple of ways of going. One was to take the highway, which was a long way. The other was to go over a mountain, which was a much shorter trip. And so we started over the mountain, and I gotta tell you, that was as rough a trip as any I've been through, and I've driven in the Alps, and I've driven in the Rockies, I've driven in Mexico in the mountains, which were all rough. This was really hairpin turns, but we got to Loch Sheldrick, and we found the model home. It was on the lake, and we looked at the model home and we said, nah, this is not for us, as if we were looking for a place. Now it was about 4 o'clock. We had one more stop to make, which was here, in the Chandelier. So I look at the map, and it looked as if it would be about a half hour away, something like that. But the problem was that Sam and Blanche had to get back to their place by 7 o'clock. Because they had an appointment with Big Al, who was, remember Big Al, Lori? Mm-hmm. He was our decorator. And I had recommended that he go to see Sam and Blanche. They wanted to do some revisions in their apartment. So I said, you know what? We're up here. Let's take a run over to see what it's about. And we'll turn around and get back to your house at 7 o'clock. So we come here, and I think we pulled up to the street that we're on. Maybe because there might have been the sign which said something, houses for sale. I don't remember exactly. And as we pull up and we're sort of sitting there, this woman walks over to us and she says, "Hi, I'm the developer's wife. And we're living in one of the houses a couple blocks down the street." And she said, "The two houses you're facing are the last two houses being built. They're almost complete, but not quite. So you can't go in to see them because there's still some interior construction. But if you want to see what they look like, there's a house on the next street which is identical, and there's somebody there now." Remember, this was April, so it was, cold weather. "There's somebody there now. And if you go over and introduce yourself, I'm sure he'll put, permission into the house." And we went to his house, and he had beds all over the place. He probably could have slept about 15 people, if not more. But we got a sense of what the house looked like. So we come back to the car, and we're sitting in the car, and I guess we had already been told that the houses were going for about $17,000, $18,000, something like that. So she's back there waiting for us, and she said, "My husband is going to be coming back soon to where we are, a couple blocks down." She said, "Why don't you hang out a little bit, and when he comes, I'll let you know, and then you could speak with him." So as we're sitting there in the car, I said to Goldie and to Blanche and to Sam, all of whom are off for the summer, including myself, I said, $17,000, $18,000, even then was not a lot of money. And we were used to going on vacation, during the summer. I said, what if we gave it a shot, tried the house for a summer, and if we didn't like it, so we'd sell the houses, and so we'd take a licking of $2,000, $3,000, whatever, and it would be like we had gone on vacation. And they all agreed it was, a good possibility. By that time, she came back and she said, "My husband is here," and we pulled over to where they were living. And he came over, he said, "Why don't you come into the house, we'll have a drink, we'll talk, a little bit." And so we came to the house, and I think by then we were sort of chomping at the bit, maybe to buy the houses. But it was a very distinct possibility. Of course, the area was gorgeous. Oh, I got to tell you that when we were sitting in the car and talking with the wife, we said, these houses are very close to one another, and you can see what's going on, and hear what's going on, and so forth. She says, "Yeah, that's true. It's the winter time. The trees have no foliage, but once the foliage grows, you're not going to be able to see any of the house." So anyway, we eventually go into their house, and we're talking, and maybe in 5 minutes, the phone rings. And this guy, the developer, whose name was Grossmark, gets on the phone. He says, "Yeah, hiya, Mr. Smith. I remember you. You were here this morning, and you were looking at one of the two houses, but you said you want to look elsewhere in order to make a decision. And now you've made a decision, and you're telling me that you want to buy one of the houses." He said, "But you know what? I've got two couples here who are interested in these last two houses, and I got to give them preference. That'll close things out for me." And he hangs up. Well, that closed the deal, of course. And in 3 days, we owned these houses. And Blanche has a little different story than I do, but Goldie and I wanted this corner house, and I think they wanted that house, and so there was no problem there. So that's how we came to it.
Okay, thanks, Dad.
Okay. Enough?
Today.
Yeah, I would think that, maybe when Michael and Julia.
Dad, this is your son Michael, and today's September 3rd or 4th, 2016, Labor Day. We're all gathered here in the country, the family, and we're continuing our oral history project, learning about your life and trying to learn things that will make us live our lives in hopefully a better way. I've missed a few of the live sessions of this, but I'm going to ask the questions today, and it's possible I'll ask a question you've been asked before.
Okay.
In which case you could say asked and answered. That's how I answer those questions when lawyers try to attack me in court. We're not attacking you. If you want to answer them again, you can, or you can just say refer to the tape.
I'll probably answer whatever you ask of me because, we're not quite sure exactly as to what we've had in the past. This procedure has taken place over a period of a couple of months now, so you tend to forget some of what's been done previously. So I'll try to do whatever you ask of me.
Okay, so, and I should add that a lot of these questions have been put together by all the members of the family, all of whom are interested in what you have to say. So let me start with a bunch of questions about things you liked and why you liked them. And these are going to have to do with when you get to choose about what you want to do. Much of your life, in my view, has been choices you've had to make, either because your father passed away, because you had a family and had to support the family, and this is not your answer, but this is my view, is the selflessness that you've displayed throughout your entire life in making our lives better. But you've had lots of opportunities also to make choices yourself. You've been when did you retire?
Officially in 1986, but I did work for another year after that. So in a practical sense, I've been retired since 1987.
And in that long period of time, for almost 30 years now, you've had a lot of time to make choices. So one thing I want to talk about is your food choices. Because what always astounded me is how unwilling you are to make a choice. So let me ask you, what do you really like to eat?
Much of what I like to eat I no longer can eat.
What did you like to eat?
No, for two reasons I can't eat it. Because of medical conditions. I have a kidney condition, so I've got to limit the amount of protein I take in from an animal of whatever sort. And the other reason is that I'm with Ruth, and that limits what I can eat as well. But that's okay, because frankly, I'm very happy with what we tend to eat. We tend to eat soups that she makes, or that we buy when we're down in Florida at the club. We buy at the club. They occasionally have low sodium soups, so we'll pick that up. And Ruth will make a salad, and we're content with a good bread. That's a good meal for us. So I no longer have that need or desire to go out and have specific foods.
But what do you miss, given that you now
in terms
have
of food?
limitation?
In terms of foods?
What tastes do you miss, or what specific dishes?
As I said, my need for specific foods, my desire for specific foods has lessened. So I can go along and I said have soup and salad and a nice bread and be very content with the meal.
What did you used to like to eat? What was your favorite?
I used to like to, okay, Grandma, my mother, used to make a stew, a lamb stew, which I liked. I liked eggplant parmesan or veal parmesan. I was never a big steak eater. I like sauerbraten. If I went to a restaurant occasionally, I would have that if it was a German restaurant. I'm trying to think. Stuffed cabbage. My mother made a very good stuffed cabbage.
Feel free to talk about what you like to eat, not as a child, but let's say as an adult.
Yeah, as an adult. Yeah. When I say my mother made those foods, my desire for them continued afterwards. Into adult life. So that's pretty much it, I guess.
Dessert? Any
Desserts? I'm not a dessert eater.
Really?
Well, I should rephrase that. When I say I'm not a dessert eater, I'm not just a dessert eater, I'm a very big dessert eater. So, yeah, I like desserts, obviously.
Which meal do you like? Which of the 3 meals a day, or 4 meals sometimes, do you most enjoy? What do you like? If you only had one meal, would it be breakfast? Would it be dinner?
Well, that's going to be an easy one to come up with, because for breakfast we only have oatmeal. And occasionally we might vary that, say about once a year, and have a piece of toast. For lunch, there's a big variance there. The question is, the question that comes up, should I have a full sandwich or a half sandwich of hummus? So there's a big choice there. And when it comes to dinner, I look forward to dinner. As I've already said, I really enjoy the soup and salad that we would have. It's interesting that we do have a routine here up in the country, talking about food, where for years now, on Tuesdays we have a routine. Talk about routines, we have a routine. We go to the farm, as we may already have discussed, I don't know if we have or not, and then we do some shopping at ShopRite, and then we go into a Greek restaurant called Yazoo, and we have eggplant parmesan with a salad and pasta, and that's pretty much it for the week.
Dad, one thing we've never understood is that we would often give you a choice. Would you like A or would you like B?
Yeah.
Would you like
Yeah.
a piece of cake or would you
Yeah.
like the cookie?
Yeah.
Now, sometimes we understood the choice, which is you say, I'd have some of both. But many times you say, whatever you like.
Right, yeah. No,
Can
it's
you
not
explain that?
No, it's not whatever you like. It really, that question really refers to my saying whatever's open. It deals with wine. I can have white wine, I can have red wine. It really doesn't make that much difference to me. And I hate to be wasteful, whether it's for myself or anybody else. So if somebody has opened a bottle of wine and nobody else is going to be drinking, in other words, if they're going to open a bottle of wine for me, because I specifically say I want white wine, and I think nobody else is going to drink it, I'm not happy with that. I find it wasteful. So I say to them, whatever is open, whatever is anyone else is drinking, I'll have that. I know a lot of people don't like that. They say, make a choice. That is my choice, whatever is open.
No, but there are times where both bottles are open and you'll say,
It depends. I sometimes will say red wine, sometimes I'll say white wine.
you don't have a clear preference.
No, it depends upon how I feel. I find that red wine tends to be a little heavy for me. White wine is lighter. So, again, depending upon how I feel at the time, I'll make a choice.
Now, since living with Ruth, do you feel you've gotten to eat as much bread as you would have made on your own?
I've always been a bread eater.
I know, but Ruth seems to be a very aggressive bread eater.
She is.
Does she leave enough for you?
I tell you this, if it weren't for the fact that we both like bread as much as we do, I don't know if we would be together today.
Is there a particular type of bread that you like?
I like rye bread, I guess. I like a chunky bread, a heavy bread, yeah.
More of a peasant bread. Do you like to have it sliced or do you like to rip it with your hands?
Well, that brings up the question of holly.
Any hollies that you've had recently that you...
Yeah, I like to have a holly sliced. When they put it through a slicer. Who says, no, I want the whole holly, we should slice it at home. So I guess I like having the whole holly sliced at home.
There's a very famous story with you and bread that took place in the country. I've never gotten the facts on it exactly right.
With whom?
With you and bread and the country, and that was an incident that occurred at what used to be the restaurant Lanza's.
With Brad?
With bread.
Bread. The food.
Oh, bread, B-R-E-A-D.
Yes, we're talking about bread.
Oh, okay. No, it sounded like Brett, Brett, the guy who does work around here. I was a little confused.
He likes bread
Okay.
too.
Oh, it's bread. Okay.
Could you tell us exactly what happened at Lanza's that time?
Well, this goes back a long time. Okay. It was Mommy and I, and the Somas, that's Helen and Jack Somas, who had come up to stay with us, for a weekend. And we decided to go to Lanza's to have dinner. And they, we ordered whatever, and they brought out bread, and we said, gee, this bread is very good. So the waitress, who happened to be a daughter of the owner and the chef, said, when you leave, we'll give you a bread to take home. So we said, gee, thanks, that's wonderful. So when it came to to finishing up the meal, and there was dessert included with the meal, it was a full meal. They indicated to us that the only desserts we could have, and I don't remember exactly what they were, but let's say you could have a dessert A or you can have a dessert B. That was it. So Jack Somas was not happy with those two choices, and he said, how about if I have dessert C? And she said, you can't have dessert C, it's not part of the package. He says, yeah, but I don't like A and B. I would rather have C. He said, but I can't give it to you. He says, why don't you go back and speak to the chef, see what he will do. And she came back, obviously, and said, you can't have C, it's got to be A or B. Okay. We're about to leave, and we're paying the bill, and we see on the bill there's a charge for the bread. Well, she had said we could have the bread free of charge, and she said that initially. So we decided not to take the bread. No, they were angry with us. It was Jack Somas, actually. He was the only one that was involved with this. They felt that he was pushing too much. If he had said to them, could I have C rather than A and B, and she said no, and he let it go with that, that would have been reasonable. But he just kept pushing. So that's the story.
And you never went there again, really, right?
No, I didn't like their attitude. I thought they overreacted. They could have come out and said, they really should have followed through with the bread, no matter what took place. But I guess they were saying, in effect, bye-bye, we'd rather not see you again. I don't know.
So let me just ask you two more questions about food, Dad. Some people just can remember the most delicious meal they ever had. Maybe it was in a restaurant, maybe it was something that their daughter made, but some people very vivid, or even the best glass of wine they ever had. Is there a food memory that you can pinpoint, or maybe it was the view over a lake when you had it, that you can recall that you'd like to?
Yeah, I guess there have been a number of times when I've had a meal that I really enjoyed, but since Ruth is sitting here, I'd like to tell the story, if I haven't already done so.
You did.
I did tell the story?
You did, about the beef bomb.
Oh, of what she had made?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So that's on a previous tape. Okay. There's one incident that comes to play. It's not so much of the food that I had, but the whole experience. Mommy and I I remember exactly whom. There was another couple, and we went out to a restaurant in Manhattan, and this was many, many years ago. And we had a meal, and everything just fit perfectly. The food was good, the service was good. We really felt good having had it. And I think it came to $50 a couple. Now today that's nothing to speak of, but in those years $50 a couple was pretty good. And it wasn't typical of what we would be spending if we went to a restaurant. But as we finished that meal and we paid the bill, we all agreed this was well worth whatever it cost. So it's interesting that one experience I think about occasionally, you know.
And on the reverse side, many people can recall back their most disastrous food experience, where they went to a place with great anticipation and the food came out and it was inedible, or whatever the case might be. Is there one that brings a smile to your face when you think back?
Well, it wouldn't bring a smile on my face. I wasn't happy. I don't remember exactly where it was, but on occasion, it doesn't happen too often, fortunately. You know, you go into a restaurant and you place an order. Well, it takes a long time for somebody to come over, number one. Then you place the order, and you're sitting there and sitting there and sitting there, and I don't care what the food's like when it comes out, you just are not happy with that experience. So, you know, that would be the other end of the spectrum from what I previously described.
Okay, that's it was very enjoyable hearing about that. You know, with all the food and the talk of eating and all the calories that are contained in that eating, it makes sense to get some exercise sometimes. And exercise has played a role in your life. In particular, since you've been retired, you exercise a lot, you enjoyed playing tennis. You weren't particularly, from what I can remember, a big sports fan. You were more of a participant. I wonder if you'd talk a little bit about the role of sports and exercise in your life.
Okay.
And
Right.
now I know you can't do them as much, you probably miss them, but can you give us some insight about that?
Yeah, well, in terms of being a sports fan, I was a sports fan as a young kid. Young person. I was a Yankee fan. I think Army was my favorite football team, police football team. Those years, of course, there wasn't much in terms of professional football. So I did follow the sports, but as I grew older, I had my interest in those teams generally was diminished, especially say in football. And I've discussed this with Jeff. When I was a kid, a young man, the baseball teams, I'm talking about the major leagues now, they were pretty stable in terms of the people who played for the team. So there was a Lou Gehrig, there was a Babe Ruth, there was Ty Cobb, who was not, one of my people, but Red Ralph and so forth down the line, Bill Dickey and so on. So they came up to the Yankees, they stayed with the Yankees, and they retired. When this, what do they call
Free
this now?
agency.
Free agent business came into play, these people who you tended to revere as a young person came and went. And so really what you were a fan of was the name of the team. Nothing else. So, I lost interest. In terms of sports, as a kid, I played a lot. We used to play punch ball, we used to play stick ball, we used to play basketball, we used to play touch football. I started tennis. I was about 17 or so. A friend of mine, a close friend of mine, I don't know how we started, but we were able to each buy a racket, and we went down to one of the parks where they had clay courts.
I thought you were on your high school tennis team, Dad.
Yeah, I was on the JV. On the JV.
Just after playing 1 year, you had gotten enough skill that you were on the JV team? As you say, you started at 17.
Yeah. Maybe I started a little early. Maybe it was 16 or so. I don't know. Yeah. But I wasn't a good player, and I was on a JV team. I was not number one, obviously. Let's see, what else was I saying? So we were able to buy rackets. It was the Depression years. all I had was the only thing I had for sports was a tennis racket, which I was able to buy, and roller skates. I didn't have a baseball glove or anything of that sort. So we for I think it was $3 a year, you got a permit for the city parks to play tennis. And we used to go down, and we couldn't afford to buy balls. So when we went down, some of the more adult people would be playing, and they would want to discard their balls after playing a couple of sets. And we used to buy the balls for them for, very little, obviously. Never took lessons. We would swat the ball, and that was it. And then, of course, following through was tennis. When Michael came along and he was old enough, we came out, we played. And I felt it was a good sport for him to have. And Laurie took it up a little bit too, not much, but a little bit. And
So before Lori and I started to play, you didn't have I thought you had played with friends back as an example, I can remember going to the park and watching you play.
yeah.
But that was, the way you made it sound, it was as if it was something that you picked up again because you wanted to encourage us, but
No. What I was trying to say is that as I continued to play tennis, and I would take you out and hit the ball with you, and I think I may have done it with you as well, Laurie, right? I don't remember exactly.
as I recall, you had a group of men that you would play with on the
we
weekend.
played doubles, right?
Doubles.
Yeah.
Do you remember the names of any of those men?
Well, Bob Greenhill was one of those. After I had met Bob, I don't know, did I discuss meeting and training Uncle Bob? I think I may have, no? How that came about?
No.
Yeah, I did discuss, I'm pretty sure I discussed that. Mommy worked in the same school as Uncle Bob, and they became friendly. And
I
Uncle
think
Bob,
you did.
yeah, I did. And Andrea had made a
Yeah.
pie,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we discussed that, okay.
Boston Creek Line.
Boston Creek Line. Well, similar to Boston.
Back to the food.
Anyway, this goes back probably to 1950. So for a lot of years we were friends, obviously, and very good friends. And
Let me bring you back to the sports though. What did you always think about sports as something that you had or exercise as something you wanted to put into your week because it provided a stress reliever, or you enjoyed it, or was it just another thing to do?
it was something to do. And along with my friends, this is what we did. So.
How about later on, when you became, let's say, retired, or you saw how important it was to me, as an example?
Yeah.
Did that change your? How you feel?
No, I enjoyed playing tennis. I wanted to play tennis. It was something to do that was satisfying, And I think there was a period of time when I stopped playing, and I'm trying to think why. Maybe it just wasn't convenient. I didn't have access to course. I don't know that, but I did take it up again, especially when we came down to Florida and Boca West, and I took it up there. And from the time we started at Boca West, which was in about 25 years ago, right, Bruce? Yeah. I played tennis until the start of this year.
How's it feel not to play right now?
I miss it, obviously. I miss doing what I did previously. The two big things that I did previously was to play tennis, and up here take a 3-mile walk. Years ago, I used to play ball at the Waldmate Hotel up here when we were up in Livingston Manor. Used to play paddleball up there, but that stopped a lot of years ago. I miss not doing the tennis and the walks, but 93, I know I'm not going to be able to, even if I didn't have a problem with my knee, I know I couldn't continue much beyond where I am now. I fell a couple of times while on the court, I I've reached that age. If my knee were in decent shape, I guess I could take long walks still, but that's out. So you've got to adjust to what you can do.
Sure. Is there when you look back, do you wish you had picked up another sport, or you feel like, gee, if I wish I had the opportunity to learn how to skate or shoot arrows?
Yeah, right. As far as other sports, no, tennis was adequate because, I was working, so in order to participate in playing tennis, that was a weekend activity. So really I didn't have time for anything else. As a kid, of course, we played a lot of sports, as I've already indicated.
Now, Dad, in your leisure time, one thing that I've always thought about is that you always seem to have a passion to travel. And for going, of course, the jobs that you and Mom had gave you time that not every working person had to travel, but you guys would always go on a trip every summer. Much for Lori and I, it worked out great. We got the run of the house oftentimes, and we also got to hear about your travels. But where did that love of travel come from? Do you have any idea?
I don't even know if I had a love of travel as such. It was something I wanted to do. Maybe it's because it was available. I had the time and it was available. But I enjoyed it because I was able to pick up a sense of the various cultures and the history of the places we visited. I did love looking at mountains. In fact, when we went cross country, you and Lori and Mommy and I, of course, and we were out 10 weeks. 7 of those weeks we were traveling, so we hit a good part of the country, and I thought it was gorgeous. That was one of the best trips I've ever taken.
It was a great trip.
Yeah.
But do you like the mountains more than the seaside, you said?
Yeah, I prefer the mountains to the seaside, right, yeah.
What about the mountains is...
Well, Mom and I don't know, you want me to say something about where we had gone and where we'd gone since? Between Mommy and I and Ann and I and Ruth and I've covered it, I won't say I covered the globe, but I've covered a lot of spots. I've been through Asia, I've been through Europe, South America. I never went as a tourist, but I was in some of South America during the service, as I've already indicated. And I think I also indicated I would have loved to have taken a cruise. Did I indicate that? Through South America?
No.
I never brought that up? Yeah, well, should I bring it up, Bruce?
Sure.
Ruth and I had gone, as I did with Ann, and I think I may have gone with Mommy. We went to what's called elder hostels. They're no longer called that, they're called something else. But
Road Scholar.
what are they called now?
Road Scholar.
Road Scholar.
Road Scholar? Okay. But for years it was called Elder Hostel. And the Elder Hostel program came about, it's interesting, it came about because many of the colleges and universities who had a lot of dorm space were running into trouble because during the summer months those dorm spaces weren't being rented. So somebody came up with the clever idea, gee, there are a lot of seniors out there who are retired and they probably would like to have a college experience. And so the Elder Hostel program developed typically a 1-week session at one of the colleges or universities, and you would stay at a dorm. And they would provide a course or courses for that 1 week. Eventually what happened is that I guess as people became more affluent, they decided they didn't want to live in a dorm so much, so the program expanded, so they went into motels, for sleeping purposes, inns, hotels, and so forth. But that was the concept. Anyway, about maybe 10 years or so ago, Elder Hostel came out with a program in conjunction with the Holland American Cruise Line to take a cruise from Miami down to the Caribbean, down the east coast of South America, around the Horn of South America, up the west coast, and back, I guess, through the canal into the east coast. And that was going to be a little over 2 months.
Wow.
It would be a long cruise. And the reason it was going to be so long is because it just wasn't getting on the boat and going along, but as you came to various tourist spots, you would get off the boat and they would either bus you to the spot or they'd fly you if it was into, further in off the coast, or however they got you. So one of the places, as an example, they would have taken us to the rainforest in Brazil. On the west coast, as another example, they would have taken us when we hit Peru rather. They would take us, and I never pronounced this properly, Machu Picchu, or
Machu Picchu.
how do you pronounce that?
Well, you ain't got to both places.
We never did, yeah.
No, I'm saying you could have got to both Machu Picchu and Machu Picchu, but
I mean, that was one of many places that we'd have stopped. So, as I say, it was a cruise, I think just a little over 2 months.
Why didn't you go?
I was hopping to go. I really wanted to go. Money was not an issue. And I felt that if I didn't go, if I was with Ruth at the time, if we didn't go, we probably would never go down to South America on any trip. So when I presented to Ruth, she was not great about it, not very positive. She felt 2 months was too long. It was also, I think, January and February, and we were in Boca West at the time, so we'd have to leave Boca West and so forth. And Marcy...
Well, Marcy wasn't involved.
Marcy was involved.
it's his interview.
Marcy was involved because Marcy felt that at our age, it didn't make sense because what if we took sick? Well,
There we go.
because I was in my 80s at the time, but I was in good health, and Ruth was in good health. So Marcy was discouraging. Lori said, go. In fact, Lori said, if Ruth doesn't want to go, I'll go. So I was disappointed. I wasn't going to go, obviously, if Ruth didn't want to go. She wasn't comfortable. And that was the end of that. So.
What about, I think you also were disappointed that you didn't get to go to Cuba, right? Didn't you want to go to Cuba?
Oh, Cuba. Well, as I've already indicated, doing the Royal Station in Cuba, and it was just, luckily, that was a good experience. And I said, gee, when I get married, I'd like to take my wife to Cuba. So by the time I married Mommy, and a couple of years had gone by, Cuba was out of the question because Castro had come in. So that was the end of that.
Dad, in all the places you've gone to, any of them that you said, gee, I'd like to live there, or the way they live makes sense to me, and I would like to take some of those aspects of the way they live and incorporate them in how I live?
Well, I have no regrets having been born and living in the United States. I don't think there's any other country I would have preferred being, living at, or in rather. But probably if I was born in England, I would have been happy in England, or Sweden, or Denmark, or any of those countries. But I did want to say something. Oh, in terms of where I would really have liked to have gone back at some time, would have been what's called a lake country, which is in England, and it was gorgeous. And I always said I'd like to get back there again and just walk through. It was mountainous, lakes.
So Wales,
Wales? That wasn't Wales, no.
England.
This was in England proper. Wales, I loved Wales. Wales was, I thought it was beautiful, very mountainous. I preferred Wales to Scotland. Scotland was pretty, but I preferred.
What were your feelings, because I know you volunteered in Israel, what were your feelings about Israel?
Israel, I didn't discuss volunteering in Israel, no?
No.
All right. After Mommy died, she died in February of 1978. Lori suggested, Lori having been in Israel previously for a period of, what was it, about 6-8 months, something like that, yeah, on a kibbutz and traveling around. Lori said, Dad, why don't Michael and Lori, of course, and myself take a trip to Israel that summer. So that was the summer of '78, and which we did, and that was a very good trip. We had 1 week we rented a car on our own, and for 2 weeks we went as a tour, which happened to be an excellent tour. I think it was the American Zionist Organization. But in terms of my volunteering, okay. When I was with Anne, we decided we'd like to volunteer in Israel. And we looked into it, and the Jewish National Fund had a program where they were underwriting part of the cost of going to Israel, airfare and living there and so forth. We had to pay, but it was a reduced amount. And the idea, of course, was that, as far as the Jewish National Fund was concerned, was that they would like to have people come to Israel and become enamored with Israel and hopefully make Aliyah, settle there. So anyway, they had a 3 months volunteer program, a 2 month volunteer program. We took the 2 month program, and they headquartered us in a hotel in Netanya, which is on the Mediterranean. It was right on the Mediterranean, and you had to do something, obviously, as a volunteer. So Anne and I went into an elementary school and tutored kids in English. And the way it worked, and I may be wrong on this, but I think when they reached the 5th grade, they began to study English. And so the teacher would ask if anybody would like to go to a tutor to practice their English. And of course we had kids coming to us, some of whom spoke fairly good English, but they wanted additional practice. Some of whom spoke hardly any English at all, so we sort of had to start from, we were ESL people. We weren't certified, and we didn't get paid, but we did as good a job as you guys. And that was the fun. Oh, and then they had, what do they call that? Would they give you lessons in Hebrew? Ulpan. They had Ulpan, right? And part of the day was devoted to that. And I think I was involved maybe about 3 sessions or so, and I quit. I was getting nowhere. Not having ever studied Hebrew, I was at a disadvantage. And in addition, what they did was they took us on trips. Some of which lasted 3 days, some was just for 1 day, and so forth. So it was a very good experience.
Your connection with your having never studied Hebrew, but having been bar mitzvahed, having been asked to do the bracha over the challah for 60 years and still struggling with that prayer.
Bless you.
Always in my mind raised questions about sort of what your feelings were about religion and the rest. And obviously, to me, it was very important that our family be Jewish, and that Lori and I marry Jewish have a Jewish life. What's your feeling now about how well your religion has served you?
Well, certainly I wanted my children to have a Jewish background, and I felt that was independent of whether they were religious or not, because Judaism, as we all know, has so many aspects to it, not only the religion but the culture. There's a sort of a language that ties people together, whether it's Yiddish or it's what do they call it? The ones that came out of Spain.
Sephardic.
No.
Or Ladino.
Ladino.
Yeah, Latino, right.
Ladino.
Latino, yeah. Ladino, is it Ladino?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's a common, it's a common language for Jews, which is not typical of other religions. Because if one is Catholic, for example, they could be Irish, they could be Italian, they could be Southern German and so forth down the line, and they each speak a different language. So to repeat, the Jews have this language that sort of binds them together, no matter where they're from. And of course, you're affected by how you grow up. I grew up in a Jewish home, and I tend to be comfortable with Jews, although I've had friends who are not Jewish. And I went to a high school which was essentially not Jewish, so that was not a problem.
When you married Mom, and she came from a more religious home than you did, and they celebrated the holidays to a greater extent. Grandpa Klein was an avid synagogue goer. They kept kosher. Was that a problem adjusting, or did you find that comfortable?
No. Actually, when Mommy and I established our own home, we decided to be. She said she'd like to be kosher because her parents were kosher, and so that when they came to have a meal with us, they'd be comfortable. And I didn't have any problem with that. No. I felt this is something that had to be done. The interesting thing is, though, that when we came up here, we were not kosher, and maybe because, of course, they weren't as involved coming up here as they obviously did when we were living in the city.
Do you feel that over time, you were never much of a temple goer, and later on in life you used to go occasionally on Friday night. Do you feel like you've become more connected, more desire for some spiritual things now than when you were younger, or that really hasn't changed much?
No, there's been a progression over the years. When I was bar mitzvah, I indicated I was bar mitzvah. I laid, is it called film?
Mm-hmm.
I did the film for a while, then stopped that. At some point, I felt I was an agnostic. I didn't know whether or not there was a God or there wasn't a God, so an agnostic. And then eventually I progressed into a feeling of, I don't feel there's anybody up there pulling strings. The question is, how was the universe established? I don't know, but it was, and so I'm comfortable feeling that I'm an atheist. But along with that, I feel I'm as strong a Jew as the religious Jew in terms of a sense of Judaism.
And do you feel you've been successful at passing on that connection to your children and grandchildren?
Well, I don't discuss my feelings of my attitude towards whether there's a God or not. I don't want to influence anybody. But in terms of Judaism, a feeling of Judaism, I think it's taken place. But of course, you guys have to answer that more so than I.
So, Dad, we've been going for an hour and 15 minutes already today, so it's been a great interview. When you think back, you've had 93 years. Is there something that makes you particularly proud that you when you think of that you yourself feel, I'm so pleased that this I accomplished this, or I led my life in a certain way that you think about?
No, I don't. But you raised the question, and paramount in my mind would be that both you and Lori have turned out, and your offspring, have turned out to be very stable individuals. I have no concern about you're making a living. My feeling always has been if someone is stable, I'm talking about mentally, of course, and they're reasonably intelligent, they're gonna do okay. They'll make a living. And the important thing is that your needs are satisfied, because I think the worst thing for someone is to have desires beyond which they can attain. So I think both you and Lori and my sense is that the offspring are in pretty good shape along those lines.
And are you saying that you're taking, as I think you should, a sense of pride in being part of whatever it took to bring Lori and I to that point and teach us a certain way and to pass that on? Is that the pride you're feeling, or you're happy that when you look back and you say that's an outcome that makes you at ease? But that's not the question I asked. I asked, when you look back and think about your role in your life, what it is that you can look back on with satisfaction and pride.
Michael, I don't look back and say, gee, because I did this or I did that, things turned out as I hoped they would be. I did at the time what I thought it should be done. In some cases, I'm sure, it may have been excessive one way or the other. But overall, I assume I did a reasonable job, because look, you two guys, and as I say, the offspring are in good shape.
And I guess
so I don't look at it as pride, taking pride. It was something that existed, and I did what I thought should be done, and that's it.
And I guess I would go further, and when I think about the model that I had for my child and how I wanted her to turn out, and that my role, it was so easy as a parent to want to be friends with your kid, and you do want to be friends, but you need to teach them to be an adult. And I felt that you weren't always my friend. You often could be a disciplinarian, and you could be harsh, I could resent you. Of course, you also were a friend. But you turned me into an adult at a relatively young age, I felt, but in an appropriate age, and I felt that the same was true for Lori. And we've been successful with our kids, although they're not always acting like adults. But they are, relative to other kids, they're independent. And I owe it to you, I think, and I think you should look back at that with a great deal of satisfaction. And it just wasn't happenstance.
Yeah, well, there's satisfaction, obviously. As I say, I don't take pride. I don't say to myself, I'm terrific because my kids had turned out to be terrific. No, it was, to repeat, it was something that I felt at the time should be done. I should act in a certain manner, whether you liked it or not. And that was it. And luckily, it turned out okay.
Mm-hmm. Dad, how about, there's sort of the flip side of the coin, which is that are there things that you wish had been worked a little differently? Obviously, we wish Mom hadn't gotten sick, although that brought other wonderful people into our lives, as it turned out. But are there things you can think about that you wish you had made a different decision?
Well, I can't wish back to those things that might have occurred over which we had no control.
Absolutely.
But the choices I made turned out to be okay for me, and I think for the family. Didn't make a tremendous amount of money, but I never had the feeling I needed. Whatever I made, in other words, I did whatever I had to do in order to make what's commonly called a living. I worked 3 jobs at one time. You know, I taught during the day, I taught at night, was the second job, and I used to work for Uncle Sidney as a custom peddler. So whatever I had to, and then I would work during the summer. So whatever I had to do, I did to satisfy our needs. But I did okay. We were able to travel, able to send the kids to college. Able to clothe ourselves in an adequate fashion. We were able to go to the theater frequently. So, it was a good life.
Well, Dad, I don't know. I'll open it up to others to ask questions, but let me just say that the love of your grandchildren and your children for you is just a very a real indication of the success and the sustenance you gave us, and we thank you for that.
Well, I thank you for that. This all has not come from one direction. Of course, Mommy was involved as well, but there was something within the offspring that caused them to become what they are. I'm a firm believer that we're all born with certain characteristics, and that those characteristics are perhaps molded to some extent by the environment. The environment being people out there and people close to us. And so, look, all I can say is that I've been fortunate that things have turned out as they have. You hear stories of people who have such problems with family of one sort or another, and I don't have it. I've been fortunate also. Not that Mommy died, obviously, but as you already said, Anne, when Anne came on board, I think she worked out very well with the kids, my kids, and the grandchildren. And I worked out with Matthew, her son. And when Ruth came aboard, exactly the same sort of thing. My sense is that I know that she gets along beautifully, and my kids love her. And hopefully there's a similar relationship with her children.
Okay, thank you, Dad. Jeff?
I have a couple of questions that just came up as we were listening to you speak, and they're kind of all over the place, so I'll just do real quick ones. If there is anyone in history that you would have liked to have met, who would that be?
You mean going way back?
Any point in time, in your lifetime or prior to your lifetime?
It would be a couple. I would have liked to have met Jesus. and primarily because this tremendous religion, Christianity, came out as a result. In other words, I would have liked to have been around in those years to have seen exactly, and being close to seeing have seen exactly what took place.
Even though they didn't have air conditioning.
I would have had a slave who would have.
But question number 2, off the wall questions. You know, we have a wedding coming up within the next 2 months, and Lori has said to me any number of times, you know, if you would only shave your mustache, you would look so much younger and so much better. Now, I've known you now for about 34 years, and in all that time you've always had a mustache. Have you ever thought of shaving it off?
I did. Well, first of all, I never had a mustache until Ann came along, and Michael had a mustache for years. And Ann said, "Gee, Michael looks so good with a mustache. Why don't you try a mustache?"
Interesting.
So I grew a mustache. Now, interestingly enough, and I remember this distinctly, Matthew Layson was here visiting. And I went down to the lake, as I did every day in those years, and I swam. And I came back, and of course after you swim, your hair's disheveled, you know, all over and so forth. And I guess I went into the bathroom, I happened to look at myself in the mirror, and I said, "My God, you look like you're 90 years old." This was many years ago. So I shaved my mustache. And I don't know, at some point, I guess I decided to grow it back again. I don't remember why, but that was it.
When you were growing up, or even in later years, did you ever have a nickname? I've always only heard you referred to as Harold.
No, I did. I think I indicated that previously. Yeah, I was always called Lefty. And I'm going to put the question out to you. Anybody know why I may have been called Lefty?
You were a communist. I have another question.
Yes.
What's your favorite beer?
I don't drink beer. I can't drink beer anymore because I have
When you did?
gout.
How about when you did?
I was never a big drinker. No. My taste for...
You always bought all Milwaukee.
Right.
It was on sale.
Because it really didn't make that much difference to me.
Okay. Here's my last question. What is your favorite late night snack? Assuming you were able to snack on anything before you went to bed.
Whatever's available.
Whatever's open. Whatever's open.
Whatever I could find.
Right, open.
I have one question. So we've been talking about purchasing another summer house. So if you could talk a little bit about what was your thinking? This was your idea, and what did you hope?
Okay, yeah. I don't know if we've discussed this with this interview or not, but at some point, I guess it was about a year and a half ago, the thought came to me that it would be nice if we had another house close by where we are now. And the reason was that I knew, I expected obviously that with time the grandchildren would hopefully get married and have children of their own. That was always a strong possibility. And the house that we're in now, we can accommodate everybody. It would be an impossible situation years down the road. So I threw out a thought, and it came about possibly because also next door Blanche, Sam had died, and we thought that Blanche would be interested in selling the place, and if we were able to buy that house, that would be an ideal situation because we'd have sort of have a little compound here. I told everybody, we had a meeting last summer, and I indicated what I was willing to do financially in terms of purchasing a house and providing some additional money to run that household for a period of 10 years. And and it came about that everybody was in agreement. Oh, and the other thing, obviously, the only reason I would have thought about having another place up here is because all of the 3 grandchildren loved coming up here. So it was, I thought it was the way to go.
Okay,
That's
thank
it.
you, Dad. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Grandpa.